it was in the hundreds of thousands that he netted from the launch of an ebook. I'm like, what the hell? What on earth? I was just like, I am an idiot. What am I doing?
I wanted to share a framework that we use in making decisions around quitting our jobs in finance and accountancy, and the decision criteria for your life path, like whether you choose to run an online business at all, whether you choose to be an employee, whether you choose to go and ordain as a monk or to live light, or all of these things are informed by this framework. And that's why I think it's a really powerful one, very important to get clear on. And it is to look at your life in terms of the four currencies. So money, freedom of time, freedom of location, and satisfaction or impact. You may want to add in your own currency as well if there's an additional thing that you derive value from. But when you look at any job opportunity or any business potential or lifestyle choice in those four currencies, you can make a decision much more clearly as to, is it going to fulfill you or not? And it also detaches you, frees you from having to live according to other people's expectations and ideals, which is definitely something that I think we both fell into, going down the classic graduate scheme job route and doing what we thought we should be doing in the corporate world. And I think both of us very quickly realizing there's quite a painful existence.
So I was reminded of this because I listened to a podcast Yusuf was on, Fergus Crawley's podcast, Modern Mind. So you talked about it in that, and I've not heard you talk about it for a while, but you described moving from investment banking straight out of uni into medicine and then into propane full time. And I think you were describing like investment banking as being very high on the money dial, very low on the freedom of time, freedom of location, and satisfaction dial. And then medicine kind of inverts that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So it's like lower on money and also very low on freedom of time and freedom of location, but very high on satisfaction and impact. But neither of them really like tick the boxes for you.
Yeah. And, I suppose it's important to say that there isn't a truly correct answer. It's about what do you value the most and what's going to give you the daily happiness in terms of how your week looks. I've just realized very embarrassingly that the wrong mic input has been selected after that rant at the start of the episode.
That rant in low quality audio.
God. And I'm using the MacBook mic because I selected the wrong option.
See if anyone notices.
And I can't change it mid-recording, so I've got to have to go and eat my hat. What a twat. That was on my high.
That's going to make the bloopers real, isn't it? Yeah. But it got me thinking. So I was walking Dexter, listening to this podcast, thinking how the reason why I didn't go into propane earlier than I did. Firstly, I was contractually bound and I would have had to have paid back all my training contract fees. But secondly, I thought that the money dial, I prefer to think of them in dials. I find it very, or like burners. I find that very easy to visualize because like they can all be a little bit on, or they can't all be turned to the max, can they? It's like designing a character in Tony Hawk's on the PS1.
You've only got 100 points to spend, so
yeah. Do you want it on the ollie, the nollie, the 360 flip, or whatever it is, half pipe, turn back, whatever.
Strength, speed, stamina,
style. So you can't have them all at 10 or all at 100, but you can have all of them on a bit. So it's deciding like where the dial's maximized. So I thought that money for online coaching would be too low. I thought really high in satisfaction and impact, great for where I work and the hours I work in terms of I choose those. But like the money I thought was so severely low. Like I thought we'd struggle to make like 500 quid a month doing it. So I didn't do it. And it was only when it was a combination of John Romanello, Mike Samuels, and Paul Mort seeing how those guys, I know Paul Moore wasn't in the fitness industry at the time, excuse me, but we joined a course. Paul Moore did a course which was £1,000, and we were in a group on the day that launched with 70 people in it. And I was like, wow, like Paul has made 70 grand in essentially a day, which was like the salary I might have been on if I'd stayed at what I was doing for 6 years, 7 years or something like that, ambitiously.
That was a real,
longer than that, actually,
like earth-shattering thing. It really broke our beliefs around, like, oh, you can make that kind of money on the internet.
Well, even more so, the reason I weighted it a little bit low was because of who it was. But when John Romanello broke down the launch numbers of his fitness product, which is called Final Phase Fat Loss, it was like in the hundreds of thousands that he netted from the launch of an ebook. So it was like we did like 1.3 in total takings, and then some of that goes to affiliates, and some of that goes to the platform, and then I took about. I'm like, what the hell? What on earth? I can remember where I was sat. I was in my car, just pulled up to a law firm that I was auditing. Sat outside, and he just said that, and I was just like, I am an idiot. What am I doing?
So there's a perfect example of, like, because you were working really hard to not only in that job, but to get to that job, and you had to fire on all cylinders to point towards that. It's not like you were being lazy. It's just that you were pedaling really hard in the wrong direction, simply because neither of us had really sat down and fully examined what do we want out of this career. And I think it's very easy to do that. And it's why, like, before you consider efficiency and speed, you need to consider direction. And it's a bit of a harder thing to try and figure out. But, just give it an hour, sit down and open up a journal and just like draw out the 4 dials and play around with them and think, like, okay, how would my life feel if it was turned up to the max on this, but really low on the others, or vice versa? Now, the other thing to consider is that some of these dials interact with other dials. So it's not fully, operating in a vacuum. That if you were to go and get a sales rep job in a SaaS company, like a software company, and you smashed it for 3 years, and then you live like a monk, you could probably retire. So, it would age you 10 years maybe, but it's a consideration that turning up the money dial can then turn up the freedom of time dial.
It gets even more complicated as well, because time, an hour of your time, you could argue, is worth more. Let's say you're 32, like we are, and an hour of your time today versus an hour of your time when you're 72 or 82, and what you can multiply that by. So like your energy, willingness to take risk, desire to do certain things, flexibility, especially if you don't have a family, if you don't have children, if you're not married or whatever. Like, arguably the value of your time changes over time. The value of a unit of your time changes over time as well. So the traditional model, which is what's spoken about in the 4-hour work week, of like work until you're 70 and then retire, doesn't really factor that in. That like when you're 70 and you've been working 60, 70-hour work weeks until then, to then attain the freedom, actually those hours aren't worth as much as if you'd had more freedom when you were 30.
Yeah,
that's the other thing to bear in mind.
That was another belief shift for me, or just again an unexamined belief, kind of highlighting the blind spot. Tim Ferriss jumps into your mind and like rattles about with a torch, and you're like, whoa, I didn't know that spider was there.
I heard, yeah.
Which was the thing you described there, of like, most people will set up their life time-wise and financially to retire at the age of 65 or 70. And so they backload all of their freedom of time and location to the point where they are physically in the worst shape to enjoy that retirement.
Yeah.
Whereas what he suggests in the book is that you do mini retirements throughout your life, and also that you test lifestyles that you think you're working towards. So he was like, oh, my ideal would be going to like sit on a beach in Bali with sipping Mai Tais, and that would be my life. Like, that's what I would do when I retire, when I've got the 10 million pounds or whatever. And so he's like, well, I'll go and test that for 6 weeks. I think he managed 2 weeks, and he was like, oh, actually, this is pretty mind-numbing. So, so obvious, but like, oh yeah, if you just like go and test the hypothesis that this is what I would enjoy, just go and see if it holds up, and then if it doesn't, then maybe it's not what you actually wanted.
I do wonder whether when I'm 70, assuming I live that long, or 75 or whatever, will I want to retire or not? Like, if I was given a choice that you can continue what you're doing or you can stop, I worry that I would find less fulfillment without having like a project or something, you know, unless you sort of fabricate a project or you find a new hobby or something like that. I don't know whether it lines up with sort of what I think I would want anyway. So the idea of sort of sacrificing all of your youth for that, I find very challenging.
Hence why kind of having meaningful work with freedom and enough money to support that, and then being able to spend time with loved ones and like meals with friends and like time with family and dates and holidays and just that stuff, like the really, really basic joys of life, that if you were working flat out in investment banking, you sacrifice all of that stuff for one currency, for one dial.
The part of the reason why I wanted to speak about this was actually no, just linked to that. I'm, as we've just discussed, I'm trying to be in a calorie deficit at the minute, and I'm extremely hungry. And I was thinking this morning about an interview with Kai Green at the end of his contest prep, where he was like, all I want to do is like smash a big plate of donuts, but I know that's a trick because I know that it'll be just as satisfying as like meal 3 on a normal day of dieting. Like, it'll taste just as good, it'll be just as satiating. Like, mechanically it's a very similar thing. It's just a trick. My mind is just convincing me. And I think having a job that you enjoy, and then having the occasional weekend where you go away with family, or having an evening off, or, you know, taking a week of holiday, I think it's the trick of the mind to think, God, wouldn't it be great to have no work? Wouldn't it be great to be able to retire? But actually, like, having a nice weekend is just as enjoyable, but you still have the focus and assuming you have a job you enjoy. Like, I actually think that's a better structure than just suddenly having nothing to do.
What a comparison. Yeah. I love that, because you're right. It's the contrast. It's the point of a holiday is that it's a holiday from the thing, and that's why it's partly why it's enjoyable. Did you ever see the video called Fat Nick Post Contest?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I'll put it over this video. It's a guy who has just finished a bodybuilding competition. So he's in bodybuilding shape, shredded. And he's like, right, I've been restricting for 4 months or 6 months. It's time to go ham. I'm going to eat what I want, and I'm not going to stop, and I don't care. And he just goes to like all these American diners like IHOP and like places that sell like cherry pancakes with ice cream, and he just goes nuts on it. And he gains 34 pounds in a week. And you see the before and after, and he goes from actively shredded to actively fat. It's a very strange sight.
It's sad, isn't it, really? Having been in, like, not necessarily contest lean, but having like got to really lean myself, the thought of then just throwing that away in a week, like the weeks and weeks and weeks of pain that's just gone.
But you can also look at that and be like, I can totally I could do that. Like, I could totally imagine.
No problem.
If someone said, right, John, you've got free reign off to IHOP with a company card.
Probably not now though, because having just been in America on honeymoon, like I had that thought. I was like, yeah, I'm not going to count anything. Like, I'm just going to eat whatever the hell I want. Like, you get pretty full pretty quick. Like, the thought of another plate gets fairly like off-putting fairly quickly. But if you're in that like post-contest, really, I think those floodgates just get lifted, don't they? And those rules don't apply anymore, and you can just eat until there's no limit, till you reach like it starts overflowing and you're actually throwing it up. But what I was going to say before, the reason why I wanted to raise this was, I think probably for us, and I think for most people in listening to this, a financially successful online fitness business means those dials are turned up as high as they can be. I think if you compare it to a face-to-face business, like look at a face-to-face PT business or a gym and ramp that up to its highest financial success level, what is the problem with that? It's time and location. Like there's still the financial and there's still the impact, but the thing that people say to us on calls all the time, they complain about, is I just want some time back. I just want to be able to like spend the weekend with my kids, or I just want to be able to go on holiday and not lose income. That's where the problem lies. So back to your example before, like given an hour, I think in that hour, think, what am I doing now? Let's play that out for 10 years and let's say it goes as well as it could go. How do the dials score? So if you're in a career and you don't like it, do it for 10 years. Where does it end up? If you're in a gym and you fill your calendar, where does that end up? And I think the only reason why people don't do the online thing is they think they won't make it work. But this is the Gary Vee advice. If you're really successful at something that you're not really fully behind, imagine being fully behind the thing that you're doing and having the time and having the flexibility. What would things be like then?
It's a good point, because now the idea of doing an offline business, like if we were to say, oh, we'll create an offline offer and all of the things that are associated with that, it might bump up the money dial a little bit, but it's going to severely turn down the other two.
It would be stuff, I think, for you, I think it would be stuff like having to like use a bit of paper, or like the council sends us a form to fill in for the building.
Like food, you serve protein shakes in your gym. Right now you need the food hygiene certificate, and
yeah, and you'll try and do it in a portal, or you'll try and like hire a VA, but you'll just come up against like public sector just bashing against you.
City council paperwork. Yeah. They sent, you have to print off the form and then fill in get it stamped by your bank. And
the thing you kept coming back to in that podcast, which for people listening, if you want to listen to another podcast, I'd go listen to it because it's really good. That you keep coming back to this idea of like a leveraged income versus a non-leveraged income. So that's the other thing with online and offline, is that you can make something, put it on the internet, and set up an automation that sells it, and then it just sells, versus attending a gym hourly to generate the same income.
Yeah, it's the residual value in the work that you do, and it incentivizes you to then create the best gold standard version of your work, because you know that it's going to be copied and pasted everywhere, and it'll be doing it. You're creating an asset rather than doing a bit of work. And so if over time you're creating hundreds or thousands of assets, which is just, that's your content marketing, then that works while you're asleep, and it's incredible. The podcast, by the way, thank you for the plug, Johnny, is Modern Mind with Fergus Crawley.
Yeah. So
he kindly had me on. He's a hybrid athlete, very impressive guy, actually. Runs a hybrid athlete coaching business, does a lot of stuff for charity, for Movember, for men's mental health. And he recently did a 60-600 challenge, which is something like 60 miles or 60 kilometers and then a 600 total. So some kind of like super triathlon event.
That's impressive.
I'm gonna have to dig up the numbers because I've probably butchered that, but it's a lot of like cycling and swimming and running and lifting and just everything at once.
I listened to those guys talk about that. I listened to him talk about his method of training, and I think I'd probably, if he described his training to me, I'd be like, yeah, that sounds fun. The bit that doesn't sound fun is this like a 7-hour bike ride.
Well, he did like a 48-hour one over a weekend, which is what he was gearing up for. But yeah, it's
like think what I could be doing with this time.
Yeah, I mean his approach is like he's like I like the idea of CrossFit, but I don't like the execution because it's chaotic and there's no structure. Like, what I'd rather do is I want to have good endurance and good strength and good whatever. So I'll just train those disciplines separately and then just get good at all of them.
Yeah.
Rather than try and do them all in one training session and not really achieve anything.
Yeah. I think I have the same itch as him, listening to him talk about it, but I think I've applied that. I think golf is that for me. And anybody who hears that and thinks like golf's stupid, like go and play golf for a month. Like go and play a couple of full rounds of golf for a month. Someone who's quite athletic. And you'll realize how it just batters you from all directions.
Really? You just have to get into the valley of despair to fully recognize that.
So imagine, we'll end with this. Imagine for 3 hours and 45 minutes applying maximal concentration to everything that you do for that time to try and get the best score you can possibly get. And on the last tee shot of the 18-hole round, you hit it out of bounds twice and apply loads of penalties, and suddenly what was going to be a PB score is now not even anywhere near your best. It's just psychologically, and also having something really bad having just happened, and then you've got to be like, oh no, never mind.
Yeah.
It's just physically, emotionally, mentally extremely taxing.
There's a new world record set yesterday of the most eggs balanced on top of each other, long ways.
Oh my God.
And I imagine that's exactly how it feels.
Yeah. It's quite nice in a way that though, because I'd prefer that, because as soon as it goes, it goes. I think the reason that scenario is so mentally challenging is that
The slow tumble.
you hit one shot and it goes out of bounds. Like a professional golfer would hit the next one straight, par the hole, and come off with minimal damage. The amateur, like me, whose emotions are like a tumble dryer on max, hits one out of bounds, hits two out of bounds, hits three out of bounds. And so the thing that you could have rectified and controlled, because you can't handle the inner turmoil that it creates, makes it even worse. How many things in life are like that?
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. Real mental training there. So there we go.
Right, we must go
Diamonds.
have this meeting, this secret meeting.
Speak to you next week.
Bye.